Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the NBA Front Office Show. What a weekend it was. A busy time for us because we have a new collective bargaining agreement. Keith Smith, NBA, and I, you can find him there on Twitter, went over the details that we had at the time of the new collective bargaining agreement. But of course, as this stuff kind of goes, more news has trickled out about what's going to be in the new CBA. So that's what we're going to focus on today, breaking down the latest stuff that we've got on the new collective bargaining agreement, some rule changes that are taking place in the NBA. You guys can find me on Twitter at Trevor_Lane. Keith, there's a lot to dive into here, and there's some of it good, some of it it's got fans a little bit upset. So let's get into this. Let's start with the super tax penalties. What's going on there?
And first, let's say you and I are going to lead the charge to make calling it the super tax happen.
Let's do it.
Because second tax apron, it's just too long. It's cumbersome. It's burdensome. It doesn't fully explain to people what it is. But if you say, oh, the Warriors and Clippers, they're super tax teams, people are instantly going to be like, oh, I get it. That makes sense. They're super duper expensive. And here we go. So,
and we already have super max as part of our verbiage,
exactly.
So it fits, right?
Yeah, exactly. Sign too many super max, you'll be in the super tax. So that's as close to singing as I'll come. Maybe we'll see how that goes. All right, so we already know those teams. We already knew a handful of restrictions that were going to come on them based off of what leaked out early Saturday morning, I guess it was. And one of those is they won't have the taxpayer mid-level exception to sign players with anymore. Here's some other stuff that's come out because there's even more restrictions, penalties on these teams. They cannot send cash in trades. So that means they can't buy picks anymore from teams. They won't be able to take on a minimum salary guy just by buying the contract from another team. They have restrictions on their first round picks. The wording on this is weird, and I have yet to be able to get full clarification because the way it was worded is unable to trade picks for 7 years. And the question is until you're 7 years out, after 7 years out, that's what we don't fully know yet. So we'll see.
Yeah, I would assume it's not you can't trade any picks over the next 7 years. I would assume it's that seventh, like you can't trade a pick that's 7 years away.
That's what I'm thinking.
That's got to be it.
And that seems to be where most people are at. But with some of the stuff we're going to see, right? Well, we'll find out.
Right. It feels way too restrictive otherwise.
Exactly. They can't sign players on the buyout market. I'm going to be very curious to see how is this policed? Is this you can't sign any free agent who is waived after the trade deadline? That would be, I think, the most simple way to put this into effect because you can't make it just any player that gets waived because guys get waived at the end of training camp. That's not the buyout market. But so go ahead.
And to clarify, but maybe you mentioned this already, but this is for teams that are $17.5 million over the tax apron. That's what we're talking about here. That's what will qualify you to be in the, as we're calling it, the super tax.
Yep. The other one, this is huge. I think this is the biggest penalty of all potentially. You cannot take in more salary via trade than what you send out in a trade if you're in the super tax. So you will be restricted to taking in less money or the same amount of money as you send out. Same amount of money you send out in a trade, extremely rare in the NBA because contracts go all the way down to the dollar. So this one is pretty. I was about to say this restriction is pretty restrictive, which is, that's a duplication there, but it is there's no other way to put it. This one's tough, right? No cash in trades. Okay. Not losing the MLE. All right. That's some of those teams don't use it anyway. No buyout guys. That's all right. That sounds bigger than it probably is. We've talked about it ad nauseum. The buyout market rarely delivers, majorly impactful players anyway, but the not adding salary in trades is huge. Now, so what this could cause is, do you get to the end of a contract with a player and you're like, well, this guy he's a $20 million player. Well, let's give him a $30 million contract so we could have him as a $30 million trade piece to go acquire a $20 million player. or a
Right.
$25 million player or whatever it is. That's going to be some of what happens here with this too. If we think this is, I believe, a John Hollinger term, the bird rights trap, which
Yeah.
generally we talk about in situations where it's like, well, you can't replace them because you're so far over the tax. These teams, because they're over the cap, rather, these teams, because they're so far over the tax, are going to be in the same boat. And you may see them really painted into a corner of, well, boy, we really can't replace player X, so we got to re-sign him because we're in a spot where we won't really be able to replace them if we lose them. So
Well, and that's
yeah,
good to note that you may have teams doing stuff like that because look, for everything that we go over, everything we went over on the last show, everything that we're going over on today's show, teams will find a way to game the system. Teams will find a way to get a loophole, to get any kind of advantage that they can. And if that means, okay, let's be creative and let's give this guy that's not really worth 30 million, a $30 million expiring contract. So that way we can go get a guy that's worth 20 million when we throw in our picks and stuff like teams are going to find ways to create an advantage for themselves. We've seen them do it for years now. It's the way it goes. It's how you play the game. So that's something to keep in mind. And that goes hand in hand with what we always talk about. There being unintended consequences sometimes with these things. And that's something that you always have to keep an eye on. Sometimes stuff happens that's not intended when you're tweaking rules and things in the league.
yeah, exactly. And that's it. It's funny. Every person who does what we're doing here, which is talk about the salary cap and rosters and the CBA, every single person keeps mentioning the term unintended consequences, right? Because so it is. You're going to have one of the unintended consequences. I think I talked about this a little bit in the last show, is going to also be, do we re-sign this guy or do we let him go to get our books a little bit more in order so we can get out of the super tax? And again, we're making super tax happen. That's going to be a thing.
It makes too much sense.
It's just too easy, right, to call it the super tax. We have to call it that. So I think you go into these situations, and it's going to turn into, all right, wow, here we are. Like we got to let this guy go. And that's not a new concept, right? Teams have done that for years now, but it's going to be more of a new concept because these teams, it's not a hard cap because you can always still sign your own draft picks. You can always sign guys to minimum deals. You can always re-sign your own players. So it's not a hard cap, but it's making it really tough for you to add talent outside the organization in this spot. So
And it
super
all
tax
makes sense.
penalties are tough.
And it makes sense that you're going to not allow a team that's in the super tax to take on money in a trade because the whole goal is to stop teams from spending their way
Correct.
to contention or whatever. And so you don't want them to be able to say, yeah, I'll take on all this money and 125% of the deal or whatever. And you just don't want to be able to do that because again, that's just sort of spending
Yeah.
more and more and more.
And as we get into the point where contracts, average salary already is about 10.5 million in the
Mm-hmm.
NBA, we're going to be approaching pretty soon, let's say the 15 million range for the average salary. That means there's going to be a ton of guys that are making $30 million. And all of a sudden it's like, all right, well, you add two $30 million players together. And if we can take on, 125% of that, which is kind of what the rule is now, all of a sudden, all right, that's $60 million, but we can actually take on 15 because we can add another 25% more. So now we can take on 75 million. And that's how teams stack salaries to get, their whole deal, their roster's so expensive. It's not just from re-signing your own guys or signing other free agents and things like that. It's often through these trades. And now they're basically saying, oh, you want to take on 60 million? You got to send 60 million out. Like that's going to be the only way you get there. So, we're going to see, how this all comes together over the next several years. Again, the other thing that's kind of been mentioned in the reporting of this is these things are going to be phased in. We do not have any of the details on that yet. So we'll see what that looks like.
Okay, let's jump over to the second round pick exception, which will allow teams to offer more than 2 years without having to dip in to their
Call it
mid-level
by its
exception
name.
for undrafted and second round players. So as
Call
someone
it
who
by its name.
right.
The
So
Rob Pelinka exception.
yes, exactly. As somebody who covers the Lakers, this team that look, other teams around the NBA look at the Lakers and they say, "What the hell are you doing? Why do you keep doing this?" Taylor Horton Tucker, Max Christie, Austin Reeves. You're having to pay all of these guys a year early, at least a year, because you're not preserving some of your mid-level exception like everyone else does. and giving them that to give them multiple extra years. So that way you've got some upside on the back end of the contract. The Lakers continue to not do that. Now they have no excuse to not do that because they built something specifically. I don't know. It's like maybe there's a flashing neon sign that they just put in Rob Pelinka's office that says second round pick exception exists or something, because now they have to, this is going to become standard that they use this.
He has to be getting multiple messages from people around the league like, hey, they made this rule because of you, right? And now I know I've picked on it plenty and I'm calling it the Rob Pelinka rule and all that stuff, but this is a great change because again, this allows teams to, so in the case, let's use the Lakers as the example right now. So this year they gave Lonnie Walker the fourth the full taxpayer mid-level exception. They could have carved out about $1 million of that to give Max Christie a 3-year deal. They didn't, right? That's just, they didn't. They gave it all to Walker. Christie's on a 2-year deal. If Max Christie breaks out next season, because he clearly hasn't broken out this season, breaks out next season, which could happen. We've got history of that going on. With the Lakers, we're really witnessing it right now with Austin Reeves, even if Reeves showed considerably more as a rookie than Christie has. But he's in the midst of a breakout season. Now you're stuck in a spot where we covered it in a whole other episode. You can look it up. It was only like a week or so ago. Why Austin Reeves and the Lakers with the arenas provision could be in a tough spot to re-sign him or match a deal. And it just gets very complicated and potentially very expensive. So now what's going to happen is, my guess is this second round pick exception is probably something you can offer these guys a 3 or 4 year deal, maybe even a little bit more money than the true minimum, because that's often what happens is teams will save a chunk of an exception. Then they can give the guys a bump in year 1 and sometimes year 2 in exchange for, hey, give us a 3rd and 4th year of team control. But instead of getting 900,000, we're going to give you 1.2 million or something like that. And that's, hey, you get more money up front, but we get an extra year of team control. Just allows us to control the free agency process a little bit more, and off we go. And quite often, it doesn't amount to anything because they're second round picks and they don't always pop. But when they do, now you really
it's a big deal.
Good place, and it's a big deal. So this is great, because the other thing is probably in intended consequence is, now we don't have to carve out a chunk of the mid-level exception. We can give the full thing to a player and say, hey, we can only give you 10 out of the $11 million exception because we're going to save $1 million for player X. All right, you can have the full 11. That player gets more money. Second round pick gets a better deal in the end, and off we go, and everybody's happy. So I think this is a great change. And we get to make fun of Rob Pelinka and the Lakers a little bit. So that's a win.
When they're going over the rules, like, I don't know if Rob was in the room or not, but I'm just picturing this scenario where, as they're discussing this, everybody just turns and looks at Rob,
right?
like, hey, are you listening? Are you? This is for you.
This one's for you. Now, what I can't wait is the next time he signs a second round pick only to a 2-year deal. And everybody's like, what are you doing? You don't even have to do that anymore. Well, why are we still doing this? Like, that's going to be absolute, because, and it might only be like one second round pick, except, right? Because I think they're also, I mean, we're seeing some of these teams have 15 second round picks over the next 5 years. Like, it's getting a little crazy. So that could be something we could also see too. Again, all this stuff, this is just off reporting some stuff that we've put together ourselves with some of this, and just things where, we don't know, because we don't have term sheets, and we certainly don't have the full real CBA yet. So there's still a lot of stuff to dig into, a lot of details, and a lot of things to be sorted out and figured out. And we'll do that over time as it comes. We're just reacting to what we know right now.
Okay, so players can also, this is probably the most controversial thing, players can invest in the league and other businesses. Those other businesses include gambling and cannabis. They also get a cut of the licensing revenue. Cannabis, I don't care, but it's the gambling thing that's got everybody questioning that. Like, is that, look, a team's going to wind up in Vegas, most likely.
Sure.
I don't have a problem with that. Players are not allowed to bet on basketball. I get that, obviously should be a rule. Is this getting too close to that, though? If you are invested in a gambling company and you have that vested interest in whether or not that company is making money, Is that getting too close to players and gambling and that whole messy situation?
Yeah, it can be. I think this is another one where we have to wait and see because there's been some subsequent reporting, I believe, from Sharania reported they can like do agreements like to promote the gambling companies, but not actually be investors in
Okay.
those and those kind of things. So we're going to see what that actually looks like. I think the league is going to be very smart to do everything they possibly can to protect themselves from player X goes out there and is, hey, my props tonight are, if I score over 20
Yes.
points, bet on this and hand up. I've been tweeting those things out as a DraftKings partner myself, but that's a lot different than Jason Tatum saying, "Hey, if I score over 30," and then Jason Tatum trying to get to 30 points. I do think there is an inflection point. This is an aside. I'm stepping up onto my soapbox here. Of the Bradley Beal situation is the most prominent one we've seen so far. But every night, you and I, Twitter is filled with, all right, this game's a blowout. We should probably pull this
Hmm.
guy out. No, he needs to stay in because I need him to score, 2 more points or grab one more rebound so I can hit
Right.
my parlay and all this stuff. And then the Bradley Beal thing, for anybody who doesn't know, a fan got in his face and started yelling at him about like, hey, you cost me $1,300, today by not playing. And Beal took offense to it, and there's a whole thing that's going on with that. So it's we're hitting a point where it's like, yeah, this is starting to go a little in a weird place, right? And we saw this for years where it's like, hey, you stink, you didn't score, more points, you didn't score a touchdown, and that cost me my fantasy win, and all that stuff. As all the stuff becomes bigger and bigger money, we're starting to see more of that, and it's just another relationship point between fans and players that could get a little sideways. Where obviously the biggest problem is if a player is, hey, oh, we got way too many bets on the over 20-point thing.
Yes.
And then we find out, well, because I'm a partner and investor in this place, I think he missed that last layup on purpose because that way his business that he's invested in doesn't lose. So I think it's more partnership in terms of probably promotions and things than a true investor in the gambling companies. What they can invest in, and it's going to be through a kind of a private equity fund that I think the MBPA is going to basically lead up and lead the charge on, is players can invest in teams and in the league as a whole, both in the NBA and WNBA. I initially misread it and misreacted too to like ownership stakes and things like that. They're going to get a stake in the overall. So, which that's
Right.
great because then even more of a reason to, hey, let's make sure we all profit here because I'm going to even more so profit,
Yep.
moving forward. So that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And people, I'll at least speak for myself here. Maybe you know more about this than I do, but people who understand all of these things better than us will break it down in better ways, and we'll make sure to consume that and then reshare what we've learned out of that stuff. Because I don't know enough about investment law and strategy and all that stuff to really get there. The last part of this, the cut of the licensing, that is huge for the players. Because
Yes.
anytime the NBA licenses anything, so if you see you're watching your favorite TV show and it's like, oh my gosh, they're at a Lakers game and it's an actual Lakers game. The NBA has licensed that, whether it be the footage or, hey, you can use NBA, you can use Lakers, or the Lakers themselves licensed it out to whoever it was, TV, movie, whatever it is, promotional material somewhere. That wasn't in basketball revenue. That just went straight into the owner's pockets. Any of that licensing, that'll now be included in the BRI calculation. So that's another chunk. There's estimates of somewhere between 100 million and 200 million a year just off licensing that'll go into the players' pockets. You divvy that up, you're talking, $100,000, $200,000, per player, and that's that's good stuff, right? That's all money that goes back to the players, and I mean, let's face it, we say it all the time. As much as Lakers, Celtics, Knicks, Warriors are brands, they're only
Right.
brands because of the guys who play. So
Sure.
it's only fair that they get a chunk of that money too.
Yeah. I mean, it's ultimately the NBA, and so them getting a piece of the overall business's success seems to be a
Mm-hmm.
good thing. This is something we've talked about a
Can
lot.
I say
Okay.
one other thing, just
Yeah.
because it's related to this? The cannabis thing, and I don't
Oh
think we
yeah.
touched on it. Is they're no longer going to test for marijuana? That comes out. The reality is it's legal in more and more places around the country now. I think the NBA is looking at it and saying, hey, this is like, it's just not something we're going to worry about, especially if all these states say that it's legal. We'll be more concerned of drugs of abuse and those kind of things and all that stuff. And this is not meant to be a drug debate by any means, but
Mhm.
this is one where, hey, if you're going to let them smoke it, you might as well let them endorse it, right? You let them drink Coke, so you might as well let them make Coca-Cola commercials. Like, what's the difference on this, right? So that part, it was previously prohibited because it was a prohibited substance. So this one is, it's fine. I no real issues with any of that on that stuff, because it's one of those things where it's happening anyway. So you might as well just lean into it and let it go.
Right. Agreed. Agreed. All right. Cap smoothing, something we've
Yeah.
talked about, and it looks like it is going to happen. 10% cap smoothing. Is that enough? Is that enough? Or are we still going to see that massive cap spike when the new
Yeah.
TV deal comes in?
So now what they're basically saying is the most the cap can go up is 10% in a season. And I think it's probably
Okay.
what we're going to find out is it's 10% on top of whatever it would rise anyway. So if it was going to be
That makes
not
sense.
not not fully on top of, obviously, but if it was like, hey, this is going to be let me rephrase that, because I did that very clumsily. I think it'll be all right. It's not going to be the caps was only going to rise 3%. So now it's going to rise 10. They're not going to do that. They are saying, hey, instead of it going up 30%, we're going to basically say 10 is where it goes to. Then 10% spills into the next year and into the next until we catch up. Right. So if we get to a year where, all right, we were only supposed to go up 4% this year, now it'll be, well, we still have to make up 10% from prior year. So let's cap that at 10%. And then, all right, we still have 6% to go. And you add that, and you just keep spilling it into the future years. So the players get it in the end, but everybody gets to eat versus one free agent class and madness and all this
Right.
stuff where all of a sudden we're at a, guys are raking in contracts that seem insane once, and then everything catches up, rebalances, and off we go. So that's where the 10% I think comes in, and we'll see. I think it's honestly, I think this is good, and I do think they set it high enough. I think they set it half without setting it too high, because you set it too high, it's like, well, then just let the cap spike. It's like, then it's fine. But you say at 10%, I think that seems a fair number. As long as it eventually does catch up.
That was my concern, Keith, was that it was going to be that 10% was not enough when you hit that cap spike. But the way you said it there, if it's 10% on top of what it was going to go up otherwise, that makes sense. That makes
Yeah,
sense. And maybe that'll be enough.
yeah, I think you just lock into the 10%, amount is probably where it ends up going. But again, not to beat a dead horse here. We'll see when we get the actual details. We'll see what it looks like. And remember, right now they're locked into an agreement as they recover from the pandemic of, hey, we can set an artificial number for it to rise by no more than X anyway. And that they've already kind of gone away from a little bit, because hey, we're all doing great. But that was on the other end. It was the cap will go up by at least a minimum of 3%. And that was, again, let's make sure guys are getting paid, even if we probably shouldn't. The cap shouldn't be raising because we're still catching up from the last couple of years. Then they locked into let's go up at least 3%. So all around, I think this is a good thing.
All right. The mid-level exception and the room exception are going to increase. Notice no
Yeah.
taxpayer exception in there. You don't want the spending teams to
Yeah.
be able to spend more, but mid-level exception, room exception increasing. I think that's a good thing for some of these players. Do we know how much they're going up though?
Yeah, it's 7.5% for
Okay.
the mid-level exception, and then it is 30% for the room exception. So the room exception is essentially going to probably
Be the
come in,
taxpayer level.
yeah, basically to the taxpayer level. Exactly. Now, these ones are on top of whatever it should have gone up anyway. So this is, to my guess is, when we see this will be a one-time releveling. So they are already tied to the salary cap. So if the salary cap goes up 5%, these all raise by 5% too. So what I think we're going to see is salary cap goes up 5%, which let me actually rephrase this and use the real numbers. Right now, the salary cap is projected to rise by basically 8% next season. So I think what you're going to see is the MLE amount will go up by 15.5%. The
Mhm.
room exception will go up by 38%. One time those relevel, then they probably drop back to raising concurrent with the cap, but it's a one time. Let's reset these. Let's make these more valuable tools. What the NBA has done is they've penalized these super tax teams way up here from spending, and they've introduced more to the teams in the middle. Here's how you will have more tools to build out your roster. And again, this is all about, I think they love this season where it's, we're sitting here on April 3rd recording this. It's like, I have no idea who's going to win the title. Like,
Yeah,
this is
right.
awesome. Versus, hey, it's Warriors versus Cavs, and we all knew it in October. And guess what? Here we are in June, and it's Warriors versus Cavs again for a fourth straight year. So I think this is something where the league wants to introduce more parity, give these teams in the middle a chance to spend a little bit more. And I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what it's all about. And if you can have that, you can have this excitement late in the season. And again, that's part of why we have the play-in tournament now as well. It's to keep teams, to keep fans more invested through the bulk of the regular season. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. So yeah, no problems with this. Let's get into the no supermax limits. Now that doesn't mean that you can just spend whatever you want on a supermax player. 300 million, 400 million. No, that's not what
And
we're
some
talking about here.
some think that's how it should be, and I can see the argument for that
Sure.
as well. But that is not what this means. Yes.
Yes, that's not what's going on here. What is going on here, though, is that you've got a rule where you can only have so many supermax players on a particular team, which we've seen come up in trade when we're
Yeah.
talking about trades. I think there was something with that with what Ben Simmons. I think
Ben
that was coming
Simmons
up with.
was the most recent one. He
Yeah,
couldn't go to the Warriors because they already had Andrew Wiggins. The Celtics couldn't acquire Anthony Davis when they already had
right.
Kyrie Irving in that spot. So, yeah. So, what it is in today's world, you can't have more than two designated players that you acquired via trade. You also can't have more than two that you had signed to rookie scale designated player deals. So what's happening now is they're eliminating that. And it's basically, this is a great thing because this is, man, we hit on, 3 straight draft picks. We're, in a spot where like we've got all these amazing young guys. One of them can't get the super max. And then that could turn into, let them leave it.
Yeah,
Why would I stay here?
I'll
You
go
can't
get it
offer
somewhere
me any
else.
more than somebody else can. So I'm going to go. So now they're basically eliminating that and saying like, hey, if you want to retain all these guys, that's fine. Because again, we added the super tax penalty. So we put a cap on where you're going and kind of locked you into you can't spend more than this. So another good change, I think.
Yeah, agreed. No problems with
A lot of
this. Allows
these
for a bit
rules,
more flexibility.
a lot of these rules designed around how can you retain your own players if you
Yeah.
want to. And this is just another step in that direction.
And along those lines, there's now also a 5th year in non-max rookie scale extensions. So if you're going to extend a rookie player, you can now give them that 5th year. Is there any limit on how many of these you can do, or is it just every rookie you can do a 5th year for now?
Yeah, every rookie scale guy you want to extend, you could give a 5th year. How it works in today's world is they have to be on a max deal. You have to be giving them the max.
Mm-hmm.
Slightly different than the designated player. This is more of the Rose Rule condition on this. They're functionally the same thing. There's differences, but not worth spending a ton of time on, especially since it's changing. But in this case, was you couldn't sign a player. Boy, I really like that guy. I want to give him a 5-year, $100 million deal versus giving him 5 years, 200 million. It's, I like him, but all right, well, I can only give you 4 years. That's, the best we can do. Now
Mm-hmm.
it's basically, hey, we can give you, not only can we give you more money, we can also give you that additional year. And sometimes for guys, that's just as important. So I think this is another good change.
So, in other words, I mean, look, you should expect to see rookies, first round picks, stay longer with their incumbent teams, and that's, hey, you teams should be rewarded for drafting well and for finding that talent.
And it's also always with all this stuff, it's important to know this is not being taken away from the player's own free agency of, I don't want to do that. This is they can still say no. They could still say, no, I only want to do 4 years. I want to get
Mm-hmm.
back on the market when I'm in my mid-20s versus my late 20s. That's fine, right? That's always existed. They're able to do that if they want, and that's how it should be, right? It's I don't hate restricted free agency. I know we're going to talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
I just think we hit a point where some of this stuff was becoming far too restricted free agency. And I think we're starting to change some of that and give guys a little bit more balance, while also allowing teams, hey, we can give you a little bit more in terms of years and dollars. Yeah, why not do that? That's a good change.
All right. The tax bans are also increasing. Now, this is something that we talked about. Keith, I haven't seen the numbers on this. I don't know exactly what this looks like, but the luxury tax is not a static number. It's not set. It depends on how far into the tax you are. That determines how big your tax bill is going to be. The farther into the tax you go, the more punitive it is. But there were questions about, will that change? Will what those increases are actually change? And now there is. Are they increasing the amount of space between the bands or increasing the penalty for each band? Because I haven't seen that.
Yeah, as far as we know, the penalty is not increasing. They're increasing the space between the bands.
Mm.
So everybody knows they're basically set at 5 million, 15 million, 20 million. There are 5, 10, 15, 20. Sorry, I skipped 10. But every 5 million is where it goes. Those were set way back in like around 2011 when the salary cap was about $58 million. The salary cap, now we have guys making more than that in a season,
Yeah.
which is bonkers. But the cap itself was $58 million. And the mid-level exception amount was about $5 million. So it was like, all right, this all makes sense. They have never changed over the life of a couple more CBAs. They've always stayed the same. So what happens is we're talking about this super tax of 17.5 per million above the luxury tax. Teams were blowing into these upper tax bands with no real issue. Even this year, I want to say there's like 6 teams that would be into the upper tax bands, which is a bigger penalty and all this. So what's sounds like how this is going to work, and we again don't have the details on this just yet. It sounds like if the cap goes up by 8%, the bands themselves will also increase by 8%. And that's where we'll see the bands themselves continue to grow, continue to widen between them. And that's the way this will work. So again, another good change, and quite honestly, a long overdue one. We've been dealing with these same bands for over a decade, and they just haven't adjusted as everything else in the NBA world is adjusted salary and tax wise.
Yeah, that's things have to continue to grow and expand. Otherwise, it just starts to become too restrictive and it just doesn't make sense anymore, because you've got numbers that are no longer reflective of the NBA's current reality. And like you said, these are over 10 years old, so it was overdue at this point.
Yeah. And they'll probably have some mechanism in there, because otherwise we would get to a point where it's like, oh man, this one's now 17 million over X or whatever it is, and we'll figure all that stuff out. And that there's a lot of smarter people than me building out the math and the correlations on that. But it's just important to know they are going to increase and widen.
All right. Medicals at the draft combine.
Yeah, huge.
That's now going to become a thing. So does that mean every team that's at the combine gets access to this? Because that was a way for players, for draftees, prospective draftees, to sort of steer their landing spot, was by saying, well, this team wants to take me at number 1. I don't want to go there though, so they're not going to get my medical info. They're not going to get any of that. I'm not going to go work out for them. I'd rather go for the team that's got the number 2 pick or whatever, right? That's what we've seen in the past. Is that now going away?
For the most part, yes. It sounds like that will change and that will go away. And just to kind of give everybody the education on this, NBA teams basically have a rule of, if you don't have a medical, you cannot draft the player. Many teams, once you get into deep into the second round, it might be like, yeah, that's fine. We'll take a shot. Sometimes even late in the first. But when you're talking a lottery pick, it's, if we haven't seen a medical, we can't draft them, because we don't know. We just don't know. Like, we don't know what does it look like, and we're investing into now, especially with the rules changing and everything else. We're about to invest millions of dollars into a decade-long relationship or longer. Like, I want to know, is their knee
are his knees shot already,
is there
or
a
whatever?
back issue in there, whatever it is. And to your point, that's how teams were saying, yeah, we won't work out for you. We're not going to share the medicals with you. A workout, sometimes teams will be like, that's fine. I don't need you to see you shoot 1-on-0 and play against a chair for 2 hours. We're good. Most of the benefit of a workout, quite honestly, is you're talking to the guy for 2 hours, where it's just kind of hey, you're getting to know you and see how you work and all those things and trying to find out if you're fit. And also, a lot of times at a workout, hey, let our trainer take a look at you real quick. Let our doctors have a peek. Let's take a couple x-rays and go. Sounds like
Mhm.
what's going to happen now at the combine is, and I don't know how they're going to do this, but it sounds like they're going to have some form of player X is expected to be drafted in the top 10. The top 10 teams in the draft will all get access to their medical. And that's
Mhm.
just going to be how it is. It doesn't sound like it's going to be all 30 teams. To me, it would have just been everybody takes a medical and everybody gets it because you could be the
What
25th
about
team
teams that trade
trading
up
in.
and stuff? Right,
Yeah. So,
exactly.
but yeah, I don't know where. I mean, I guess there was some level of let's cut this off somewhere, but it's to me, this is another good change, and this is just removing some of the silliness on this. And in general, I'm gonna be like, yeah, let's get the players everything they want. In this case, you got to protect the teams. I don't, nobody wants to find out. Oh man, we drafted a guy, and then we find out player has a debilitating back injury that may cost them years off their career that we didn't know about pre-draft because we didn't get to see that. Like that's awful for everybody. So
Yeah.
I think this is a good fix.
Exactly. All right, let's finish up with this. Restricted free agency changes. So, like we mentioned at the top, now you've got instead of 48 hours to decide whether or not the incumbent team is going to match, that team will now have 24 hours. Also, an increase in the qualifying offer amount. So, I've always felt like restricted free agency is too restrictive. Like it's because there's so many situations that we're seeing. We're seeing it every year with at least a couple of players where they're a restricted free agent and no team bothers giving them an offer. No team even goes near them because the sense is the incumbent team is just going to match. So why do all the work for them of
Mm-hmm.
creating the contract, negotiating with a player, getting the player to sign the contract, and then the team just matches, especially if you know they're going to take a full 48 hours and tie up
Mm-hmm.
all of your funds when free agency, we know how fast it moves. That's a big, big deal. So I think the idea here is by making it 24 hours, it's a little bit less restrictive in terms of scaring away potential suitors for these players who are restricted free agents. So I think that's a good change because we wound up with these kind of uncomfortable situations where players are sitting out there. They don't want to take the deal that's on the table from their incumbent team, but the incumbent team has scared away all the other suitors too, and they're just kind of stuck.
Yeah.
And we've seen that
Yeah.
take place year after year.
It's one of those things where in a lot of cases too, this is all already done while we're still in the moratorium, of the which is also I haven't heard any reporting that it's shortening even further. I don't know why. I mean, it's already gone from I want to say it was like 2 weeks to down to a week, and now it's
Yeah.
down to like 5 days. It could honestly probably be like a day or two, but who knows? With that, but if we get closer to hey, we don't even need a moratorium or the moratorium is 1 day, this then I think becomes even more impactful that it's down to 1 day of match rights. And honestly, as a team, that you don't need 48 hours. You didn't. It used to be, I want to say, way back in the day. I think it was 10 days
It
that
was
you
it
had
was a
to
ton.
match. It was a
Yeah.
ton, and then it went down to a week, and then it went down to I think 4 days, then down to 2 days, and I mean, and we've seen occasionally there used to be games, and I think it was Dan Feldman brought up this point of it's not like you're sending a letter anymore that takes
Right.
days to come back, and then it takes days to go the other way. Of it's we are exercising our right to match, being traveling by
Wasn't
the
there a
Pony Express.
situation like that where the team
Yeah,
had to get somebody had to get like a contract delivered and they were dodging the
yeah,
delivery
they
to
chased him
delay
around
the
summer
start of the
league
clock?
in Vegas. Yes,
Yeah.
so that way the team was like, then the clock can't start and it'll hold out. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I mean, that's talk about complete nonsense, right? It's just that's so.
That's that's
My
that's
thing
the
always
that's
was
the
too,
door
like,
the DeAndre Jordan door
yeah,
being barricaded by the
right,
chair.
exactly. Though that one too, I was always like, why didn't you just wait for him at their summer league game and just give it to him there? Like they're
Yeah.
gonna be there, But it's whatever. So now you've changed that part of it. The 10% qualifying offer increase too. It's just a little bit more of a bump where if a guy's like, I don't really want to lock into this crappy deal with a team and nobody's going to try to sign me. All right, I'll sign the qualifying offer for 1 year. Make that just even a little bit more enticing to a guy. Great. They'll sign and off we go. So I think that's, all around, again, another good change. It's funny. I feel like the first wave of stuff we got, which we talked about over the weekend, I was a little like, I don't know about some of these. I feel like some of these in this next wave, I'm like, all right. And it's what makes me laugh is I have a friend who let's just say connected to a lot of this stuff. And the exact quote was, don't overreact to the early stuff. There's a lot more to come out. You're gonna see a lot more things. When you get into those, you're gonna be like, oh, okay, I kind of get it, right? And it's, I mean, the early reaction from vast majority of media and fans was, what were the players doing? Then you start seeing things like, oh, these investment opportunities, this, and this, and it's like, all right, I can see why they gave on X, Y, and Z because they got A, B, and C. So it's it's one of those things where I'm trying to reserve a lot of judgment. We got to react to it live and in real time. But I'm trying to reserve too much judgment on a lot of this until we see the full details come together.
Exactly. And again, we don't have the official document yet or anything, so I'm sure there's going to be more stuff coming out, but we just want to keep everybody up to date on what we know so far, because some of these changes will make a difference in the NBA, and depending on exactly when they get phased in, could be as soon as this summer that we're seeing teams behave differently because rules have changed as a result of this new CBA. So
my little request for next time, let's not do this when we're like down the stretch of playoff races. Like, what are we doing?
Right.
Like, I wanted to, let's do a standings update. Let's do all that stuff. So tomorrow we'll try to get back to actual basketball that's being played on the court instead of in courtrooms. We'll figure all that stuff out and get into it and all that. But yeah, man, like it's like one, I've kind of got like one eye on games and then one eye on like tweet deck waiting for the next CBA tweet to roll in. I just kind of want to watch games at this point in the year. Like, so let's, but I will say it's also better than I already got done on June 15th and let's cram to get all the stuff learned before July 1st. So, if I had to take it now versus then, I'll do that. But it's just, let's try to get this done earlier next time. But again, it's labor peace. They're not fighting every year. It feels like MLB and NFL are. So we'll live with that also.
Yeah, exactly. We'll deal with it. We got through it at least. There's not going to be any kind of work stoppage or anything like that. So we'll take
that's a win for everybody.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Make sure you are subscribing to the NBA Front Office YouTube channel. Turn on those notifications as well. And of course, follow us over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. Till next time, everybody. See ya and stay safe.